Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to wrap up this week as we usually do with an album review, where we check out an entire album track by track, exploring what each song does in isolation and how it works into the larger artwork. Today we're going to be looking at a 2021 album from the band Glassing. This album is called Twin Dream. I did look up just a little bit about it, and I noticed that it's a post-metal album, but that Glassing originally started in the post-hardcore screamo realm. I'm still going to go into this with an open mind, but I am a little disappointed we could have had a screamo album today, and instead we're getting post-metal, which is a genre that frequently has bounced off of me. But as usual, try to keep the professional side intact, and we'll explore what this album is doing, devoid of the context of what I would really wish to be listening to. And you know, who knows? Maybe I actually do end up enjoying the album as well. So let's dive into this and see what Glassing is bringing to the table with their first track on the album called Spire. A pretty sludgy guitar tone to start with. Solid riff and noise, good combo. Interesting burst of speed there, particularly with the snare. Just hanging on to this tension. That's what it is. I don't know if there's a small tempo shift at that burst, but I do think the three notes prior are just behind the beat, so it feels even slower than it is. Nice bass tone at the bottom. It's a very thin fry arch too. Okay, this is kind of nice. So interestingly, we have an 18-beat phrase. I like the tom run at the end of this. Nice way of projecting the energy forward. So this is what we're in store for then. Some really heavy, borderline atmospheric sludge metal. I do find this interesting because we've had this conversation before that sludge metal is a sub-genre of the subgenre post-metal. It's a sub-subgenre? Anyways, it tends to be a bit more moving than post-metal can be, especially atmospheric post-metal that likes to really just sit in a specific vibe. Sludge tends to have a bit more momentum to it, which I always thought was interesting that sludge describes the tone of the guitars and not the tempo of the song. This is why I'm not put in charge of naming genres, though. I would never come to any of these conclusions, and we'd have a very different set of genres for this. That actually might be a fun exercise one day. Bryan's genre list. Get rid of the confusion and just have like some key genres. Anyways, I'm rambling. What else is new? This has momentum, it has directionality, it is heavy, it is weighty, it is definitely metal without, well, there still is some nice riffage to it. I was going to say metal without the strong riffs, and while I will definitely say that nothing in here is quite as catchy as classic metal, death metal, really riff-heavy genres, it still has a nice bit of momentum to it. It isn't just hold out a chord or make a wall of sound. There is nuance to what the guitars are playing. But it's not necessarily a riff focus style. We do have just the utter weight of these guitars. The bass on the low end absolutely fills that out. And interestingly, it doesn't really feel like it creates a foundation for the song. It feels like it's just more weight pushed down on me. The drums are a bit more on the functional side of things. We have some interesting choices in there. That snare roll that we got at the beginning alongside the guitar burst, the tom run that we had at the end of the song to wrap up every bar. I guess it's every second bar. Those were nice ideas of pushing the drum work forward, but a lot of the time the drummer is just keeping the tempo. And a song like this, it's really all it needs, since it is a bit more atmospheric focused than technicality focused. And all of this sort of just leaves the vocals to be the key element. And I think that they do a great job of expressing an emotionality to the listener. There's this powerful delivery. There's a lot of passion behind it. I find that Fry screamed vocals tend to really connect with me on an emotional level. This sounds like someone who is in pain. There's variation and variety to the vocal delivery. There are different perceived pitches going on. There's different types of mouth shapes that are creating almost like a sonic flow throughout it. We also have the growls that come in at places to support the harsh vocals. And it really leads the song sort of in a poppy kind of way. This song does have a verse-chorus structure. I'm not too sure what happens after that. There's definitely a shift, some sort of bridge, sure, but it kind of just does its own thing after this point. But there is a clear verse and chorus alternation at the beginning. And I think the vocals do a great job of creating diversity in their sound where the instrumentation really isn't doing that. There's some slight riffage and rhythmic ideas that are changing, but the overall atmosphere of the song is rather consistent for the first half of this track. So like I said, kind of a more mainstream approach here. Build a foundation, build an atmosphere for the vocals to reside in, for them to tell their story, for them to present the emotional component, and follow a verse-chorus idea. It's certainly done in a not mainstream, non-palatable sound palette, but it does follow some of that structural idea that you find often in mainstream music. There is a really big deviation though. The bridge. We take the energy down quite a bit. I honestly thought this was just going to be a 2-bar idea, maybe a 4-bar idea at tops. I anticipated a big, heavy hit on that downbeat to take us out of this, just a way to create some contrast. So when we come back up to this 10 sound, it's going to feel like a 10 again, but we actually sit within this for a while. I found this to be interesting. It doesn't feel aligned with the rest of the song, but it doesn't feel not aligned with the rest of the song. I think part of this is simply due to a continuation of harmonic palette. I don't think the chord progression changed much between the earlier parts and this lower intensity section. We also still have incredibly gritty guitars. This helps sonically connect everything. And I think that's really the big thing here that makes it so that it feels like it's a part of where we were. Granted, a sharp right turn, but still a part of the same city. This leads us into the outro, which I actually quite enjoyed. We have some spoken word saying something quietly, and we shift from a 2-guitar idea that's primarily focused on wall of sound. There is riffage in there, but it's really going for this big, meaty, low-end tone. We shift from that to 3-way counterpoint. We have a lead guitar in the center giving us moving melodic ideas. We have a melodic idea off on the right. It's more of a looped based riff, but it is doing something more melodic, playing off of the center. And off on the left, we have noise. I don't know if it's just constant 16th note strumming. It could be tremolo picking. It's just creating a lot of noise over here. And I liked this layering that we got in these final 30 seconds. I would have liked to see more of that throughout, but I also understand that it kind of has more layering and depth to it, and it doesn't quite embody that monolithic sound that so much of this song used and seems to require for its atmosphere. It's a very different approach here, even though I do find that it worked for my ears better on a sonic level. It is artistically very different from what they were probably going for. Still, I do hope that we hear more of what we heard at the ending throughout the song. I also hope that we return to more of these lighter sections. I thought it was pretty cool to hear the guitars kind of step back for a second and play, more moving ideas. I guess once again, though, it's a type of density where both of the guitars are doing 2 different things and sort of working around each other, moving, again, away from this monolithic idea. And actually, from that perspective, the bridge does a really great job of capturing the sonic element of the beginning, again, retaining this massive guitar tone, while also priming the song for the compositional style that's going to follow in the outro. It acts as a bridge from the ideas of the beginning of the song to how we are going to end it. It works really well in that regard. Now, emotionally, this is heavy, dark. There's a depressive element to it, although maybe that might be too strong of a word. There is definitely something sorrowful, though. A general sadness in this track that always finds a way to lean into extreme tension, as if this sorrow isn't quite enough. The weight of this melancholy doesn't quite sell the emotion, so every minute or so we get the guitars, or one of the guitars anyways, bringing in some incredibly tense chords. And at one point, even just holding on to them, the rest of the band is still trying to stay consonant, but this one guitar, I think it was off on the right side, just leaning into having this tensest chord and then just holding it 1 bar, 2 bars, 3 bars, and it's just this grit off in the corner you just can't ignore. It does go away, but the weight, the heaviness, the sorrow, that still continues on. You finally got past one massive hurdle, but you're not out of the woods yet. And I was kind of hoping for the lower energy section to alleviate this a little bit, but it doesn't. It does bring the energy down, but the weight of the emotion is still, that's still held on to really tightly. And the ending, as much as I like the multi-layered writing that's going on there with the 3 guitar parts, it still introduces heavy weight and tension and anxiety. We're getting more of that sound. It's certainly something that they want to lean into. And as we run into tracks like Where Everything Is Still or Faint, Godless Night, the next track is called Burden. I'm assuming we're going to continue to look at these heavy, weighty, sorrowful, and tense sounds. This just seems like the atmosphere that's going to match several of these titles. So I'm, like I said, just kind of prepping myself for what I assume is going to be a pretty standard sound on this album. All right, let me hit some lyrics on this one, and then we'll push forward. The repeated phrase at the end of the track is the same one we actually kicked the song off with. It says, "Is your heart not in this?" I find it interesting that when I talked about the vocal style, the first thing I brought up was passion. This is someone who really cares about the words they're saying, or at least that's how it comes off to me. And I've mentioned this bias in the past before. I don't know if Fry Harsh's technically, subjectively have more emotional information in them or not, but I definitely emotionally relate and connect to them a lot more than growls or false chord harshes. And so maybe it's not an objective thing. Maybe this is just subjectively me finding more emotion in here. And maybe there are some people who just don't enjoy these vocals at all, have a tough time connecting with it, and don't necessarily agree with the fact that I find these to be more passionate, or they don't agree with the fact that these are objectively more passionate than growls. Regardless though, I find this to be a really great choice of vocal delivery, simply because I find that the way it sounds to my ear and how I interpret those sound waves matches what I hear and read in the lyrics. Right off the bat, the line is, "Are you not passionate about this?" He says that this is an outcome we've always seen, a blame we can't drown. It's despair. That's the banner that we'll keep waving so slowly. So this almost feels like failure. Everything is based around despair. We can't change anything. We are stuck in this low point, in this weight, in this muck, in this depression. It really makes sense that the song feels this way, given that the lyrics are so focused on despair. Because I'll tell you, what we've read so far, we've just cleared the first stanza. There's only 2 stanzas. I'm kind of curious if all the lyrics are going to be this short, but there is very little said here. The second stanza says, "Another slip to reveal, a sudden end as quick as dusk, selfish silence crippling, hexed to bury us. Sermons uplift from a bottomless pit as the world staggers on." So again, there's no change to this. The world isn't getting better. It just keeps going despite the state of things. Despair, nothing's going to change. We can't change anything. Just live your life, make it to the next day. That's it. Bare minimum requirements. I really like the idea of sermons uplifting from a bottomless pit, because it implies 2 things. There's either the idea that the sermon is from the bottomless pit and it can uplift people, but it can never get out of the pit to reach the ears. Or is that there is a sermon that is helping people get out of a bottomless pit, but how do you get out of it if it's bottomless? It can help raise you up, but depending on how far down you are, being risen up isn't going to help at all. If you've fallen so far, you've got to make that same trek back up. Maybe it'll be too late by the time you actually get out. Both ideas, regardless of if the sermon is helping people in the pit or if the sermon comes from the pit, it ends up feeling like despair. Again, it is a task attempting to help things, but will change nothing. And thus, the world staggers on. So yeah, 12 lines to say one thing. Nothing's going to change. That's a heavy theme to kick an album off with. There is one thing I forgot to bring up earlier. Simply that the bridge, the low energy section, was an 18-beat phrase. If you count it out, you get 4 bars of 4 beats. There's your 16, but it just feels like it doesn't end where it should. So I counted it out, and there's just 2 extra stray beats there. Musically, it's not like a melody is wrapping up. The melody just gets extended artificially. It doesn't move towards any conclusion. It just keeps going for some reason. We could have easily wrapped it up on that 16th beat, but we don't. It just staggers on. Really great way of tying some of the musical ideas into the lyrics, or maybe vice versa. I don't know which came first, but there's certainly a strong synergy between the 2 aspects of this track. All right, we're going to move into the longest song on the album. This one's called Burden at 7 minutes long. There's an interesting rhythm to the album. We have a 3-minute and then a 7. So a shorter one, then a longer one. Then we have a 4, then a 6, kind of the same thing. Then we have a 6, and then a bunch of short ones, 2, 3, 2, 4, 4 to wrap up the album. So the beginning has this push and pull, but by the end of the album, we're rapid firing, shifting between tracks. I mean, we have a 220 and a 308 and a 222 back to back. Those tracks are going to go by so fast, especially with the 2 tracks before them being 6 and 6.5 minutes long. So it's going to be interesting to see how all of this feels paced out for me in particular, given that we're going to be stopping every couple of tracks. But I do think that the general effect here is designed to kind of be this push and pull. This was a rather momentous track. I wager that this next one's going to be a little longer, maybe more traditional post-metal than sludge. I'm going to kind of bounce back and forth between these, and I'll be curious to see what they do at the end, if they just retain the sludgy sound, or if maybe they go for a punkier direction, especially knowing that they used to do post-hardcore music. So let's dive into this. Next one's called Burden. Ooh, 7. I was totally wrong in my guess of how this was going to go down. Yeah. Such a different vibe entirely from Spire. I like it when I get an anticipation correct. Back to functional writing. Just atmosphere chord holding. I kind of figured something like this was going to happen. Maybe not this drony, but we have been pushing really hard from a noisy, punky start into more and more atmospheric ideas, pushing away from riffage and melodic concepts being the lead into atmospheric and harmonic aspects being the lead. Well, I suppose it's a series of neat ideas. There's very little interplay between all of them, though it does tell a story from chaos to weight to pain, possibly, is what we could translate the heavy atmospheric stuff to into a type of acceptance and even quasi beauty at the end. If this song is about a burden, it seems like musically we're pushing towards a removal or acceptance of whatever that negative aspect is, either clearing it out so it is no longer a burden and you feel unhindered, or coming to terms with what is weighing you down and viewing it no longer as a burden, but simply an aspect to deal with. It might even be a song about feeling like you yourself are a burden and trying to have a better uh, self image and improving the way you feel about yourself around others, particularly your relationship to others, and hoping that, by the end of the song, maybe they feel less of a burden on other people in their life. There is still, regardless what the theme ends up being, a lessening of intensity over the course of this track. And I think it does that rather well, even if I wish that there were more musical connections between the ideas. I was, however, quite happy to hear the beginning. It's abrasive. Don't get me wrong. It definitely pushes me a little outside of my comfort zone, but that is something that I don't know in particular what their post-hardcore sound was, but there's definitely a stronger, punkier element in that I can hear some sort of post-hardcore influence inspiring. And I found that the general riffage in there, aside from the harmonic noisiness, definitely had my name on it. It was very chaotic with a lot of moving parts. The drums were incredibly expressive. The bass was doing some really cool things alongside the guitars, and the vocals really worked within all of this, creating a sound that somehow was even higher than the guitars, despite the guitars being a bit high in pitch already. Very different from Spire, where the guitars were very low and meaty through the entirety of it and created this gulf between them and the perceived pitch of the Fry screams. Here, the guitars are pretty high up there already, and the screams sound higher, and it just really elevates the intensity of the harsh vocals in the beginning of this track. It's also incredibly driving. Is it chaotic? Sure. But is there momentum? 100%. We are just booking through this opening, and it feels phenomenal to be in this moment despite the utter fear and terror that most of this section sounds like to me. It is wild and fun, and this would be phenomenal to mosh to. But there's also this danger of just careening down the highway at 100 miles an hour and not having any control over your vehicle. And that's what the beginning feels like. It's the thrill and the danger. This gives way pretty quickly for a more traditional atmospheric post-metal idea. We have some larger guitar tones, but they're not quite as sludgy as they were on Spire. We shift to a more harmonic focus here, working with more quickly moving chords on the guitars. The bass has kind of just shifted to pedal tones throughout this section, and the drums, while still having some interesting flourish, are more functional than the chaotic drumming we had at the beginning. Things are starting to wind down a little bit, but that doesn't mean that they're less intense. They're just more orderly. From here, we have a series of ideas with lessening impact of nuanced writing and a larger focus on harmonic storytelling. At one point, we even just have a 4-chord progression. The guitars and the bass just play 4 chords. There's your progression. They start back over. There's no flourish. There's no extra strumming. Just play a note out and let it ring for a bar. The drums are incredibly functional at this point as well. But all of this makes sense as you understand that this song is winding down. We're moving from the harmonic and rhythmic and melodic chaos and intensity of the beginning and slowly softening elements of that. We first begin with the melodic ideas. We remove the heavy layering and look at a more monolithic style of writing, focusing on harmony. From here, we need to lighten the sounds of these instruments up, and those begin to waver and taper off until we get to the midsection. And from there, we still have some darker chord progressions, and we end up lightening those up until about minute 5 or so when we enter the sort of very pretty outro sequence. It is about, in a sense, I talked about this being a way of removing a burden. And the best way to deal with most problems is piecemeal. Anytime you need to tackle something large, you got to figure out the little things to do. And you can make a checklist out of it and checklist a bunch of small items rather than trying to tackle this massive thing altogether. And that's exactly what happens here. First, we wrangle in the melody, then we wrangle in the production, then we soften the harmony, and then we get the ending. We have taken this apart piece by piece and worked on smaller ideas, removing the hurdle or the burden, in this case, over time. I really hope that's what they decide to go with in this direction, lyrically at least, because I think that musically it tells this really well. And it's one of those life skills that I think a lot of people don't know, at least, or don't intuit naturally, because they're so, I mean, this is like the cornerstone of your everyday self-help book, is to break big problems up into small chunks. So it's kind of cool that they did this in musical form, though. And like I said, I hope that there's some synergy with the lyrics on that angle. But I do wish that there was more connectivity here. I really wish that maybe there was a thematic, not a thematic, maybe a melodic angle that would have been posed somewhere. The chaos at the beginning would have been too much, but maybe completely removing melody in our second section was too large of a jump. Maybe having a softer melody from the start in that second section that maybe we could have brought back later in the more beautiful part, maybe completely unchanged aside from the new guitar tone, but maybe even shifting it into a brighter key altogether would have been a cool way to just tie things together, to see that there is, I don't know, some sort of beauty in all of this. You just have to find it instead of removing it entirely. Again, it's the lyrics could drastically change my perception on this. But even coming at it from a purely musical perspective, I find this to, especially with the start and stop transitions, to be 4 very distinct tracks that have just been smashed together. And while it does tell a nice story, it's kind of lacking in cohesion. Now, something I picked up on here, I noticed a little bit of it in Spire. In fact, I had mentioned that in Spire, there was a thing at the beginning of the track, and it showed up again in the middle, because I think it was part of the verse, actually, where we have the doom, 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 da-ga-da-ga-da. Just like this burst of energy on beat 4, and then it goes back into this slow, plodding sound again. That something temporarily didn't feel right. And I hypothesized towards the end of it that I think the 3 notes were just dragging a little bit behind the beat, so that when the burst of energy comes in, either on the beat or even just a little bit ahead of it, jumping the gun, it feels like we're actually squashing and stretching time, when probably the tempo is consistent throughout. But there was one other place in track 1 and a couple of different places in track 2 here where there is a stretching of time. It's not permanent. It is just a single beat where the drums or the bass comes in just a little bit late, and it feels like this beat is no longer here, but kind of in this area. Everyone's kind of coming at it at different times. I don't want to assume that the band needs to practice more to get locked into the tempo. I'm going to assume, benefit of the doubt here, that this is their intended sound. But it seems rather inconsistent to me. It's not always the same beat every time through a pattern. And some patterns seem to be more, seem to present this temporal imperfection. We'll call it that. Presents it more often than other sections, and those sections that do present it more often tend to be on the slower side, which I've mentioned in the past. Slower tempos are more difficult for everyone to lock in on without someone conducting. You really need a central metric idea, and this is where, you know, metronomes or click tracks come into play. A really perfect idea, but you can't perform with one of those. So maybe if you have somebody with a guitar and they just kind of do this idea to emphasize where the next hit's going to be on some of these sections, that's one way to do it. But just generally, I found those to stick out like a sore thumb every time it happened. And if it had been a pattern, oh, you know, beat 2 on the second bar of this 4-bar phrase every time, okay, that's a choice. But when it feels as random as this, it feels unintended. Or maybe it's not planned, but still intentional. Regardless, it stands out to me in a way that I'm sure I'm going to be the only one who ever cares about it, as comes with a lot of these doomier sounds. And this song does enter some doom territory. Maybe not traditional doom, but certainly slower tempos with heavy guitar tones. And this is honestly where they came up a bit more often. Regardless, I do think this song works well, and a lot of that comes down to the ending. I was not sold on this track. We had a really cool start, and then I was a little disappointed that it was just the intro, that we have this more post-hardcore direction, and then some more generic ideas. And like I said, we're losing melody every time we move to a new idea. So atmosphere is very well done, great production, great emotionality in it. The writing is fantastic. It's just, I have a tough time enjoying slower moving atmospheric stuff. I need a melody. I need 5 melodies. Give me some counterpoint. Give me a story to listen to against the backdrop. And these guys do a phenomenal job at making backdrops, but that's where they excel. That's what they stick with. And that's what they're aiming to create in a lot of these places. And it's not my cup of tea generally. So as we are losing more and more of what I enjoy to listen to in music, and they're focusing specifically on things that I find to be secondary, still important to the song, but not things that can hold the spotlight, I'm kind of losing interest in it. And then they have this really neat twist at the end of the track, and they kind of cut the distortion for the most part. They remove the weight of everything, and we get away from these dreary, doomy chords for stuff that's a bit more optimistic, lighter. There's a very nice beauty here at the end. Some good counterpoint going on. It's not exceptionally strong melodies. I'm not going to be humming any of this after I'm done with the album, but it is still melodic writing. And it kind of dawned on me at this point, I haven't heard the vocals in minutes. This was a kind of like a 2 or 3 minute song here with a 4-minute instrumental outro on it. And that's when everything starts to click for me. And while it's still not a song I enjoyed in the moment, I think it is an incredibly strong song thematically. And the ending was what tied it all together. If they hadn't have done this, if they had just dropped it down to a more traditional post-metal song and then just stuck with this heaviness throughout, went for a wall of sound, heavy repetition idea, I don't know that it would have really clicked for me. But I love that they went for something a bit more beautiful and optimistic to wrap it up. And it's almost as if they expanded on Spire's bridge, saying that was a little teaser for what we're going to be exploring at the end of Burden. And I'm starting to see Spire as a great title track, not a title track, an opener track, where it does present what I'm going to assume is the general mood of the album, but it also captures a beauty that I hope they're going to continue exploring. That's pretty cool within itself. I'm always a big fan of strong openers. If I can listen to the first track and at that moment say, yeah, this is probably for me, or this is probably not for me, I might still give it a couple other tracks, but if they line up with that first one, I'll be like, yeah, dude, that was very indicative. Fantastic. And it's a strong song on its own, too. It's not just good within the album context. It's not just a good way to kick the album off. Not just a great way of introducing what kind of music the audience is getting in store for, but it's even good on its own. It wouldn't surprise me if Spire, especially with its length and its concise writing, was a single for this album. Because I think it does a great job at kind of being everything that I've heard so far, crunched down into a nice package and delivered at a good length. Let me hit some lyrics on this one, and we'll push forward into the next 2 tracks probably. Track 4 I didn't tell you all about, but it's only a minute long. It's probably an interlude of sorts. Alright, well, I'm a little lost on this one. It's incredibly vague, and I would love to have a little bit of help on this. As I kind of figured, given how little lyrics there are compared to instrumental work, I didn't expect a lot, but I think I was kind of hoping for more than 16 lines. The beginning says, you'll cut away from the hum of dull machines as noise. In our final wake, you'll turn your eyes from the sight and mourn the lie's respite. Left a burning hand, a hope absolved, cold-eyed specter of a memory left to fade. Left a burning hand. So like there was still more that you wanted to get done. The beginning talks about a possible death. We have a final wake going on. Hope has been absolved. So kind of a weird word for hope, an absolution of it. To make it more pure, to remove guilt from hope. I don't know. It proceeds on to say, an endless high, an alluring dream, blindly it walks down a path through the long and forgotten, while the shame burns on and on. So you have a recurring element of fire here, bringing back burning from the hand earlier. Finally, it says, though, to the lost, to the sunk, to the fallen, the mantra of live long decay. At the first bitter taste of the coffin, carry on indomitable hate, seed within me. So almost a way of passing on a torch of passion fueled by negativity, possibly. But I'm really grasping at straws on that. The death of something that causes action from others due to a shared disdain for something. At best, I think that's the best I can draw from it. So I don't really know how to pair that back to the music, given that I was really expecting lyrics that pushed towards resolution or rest or calm. Maybe this is about passing the burden of indomitable hate to others. Finding rest within yourself because your time to carry the torch is over. Maybe. I don't know. Let's push forward then into track 3 called Absolute Virtue. As I mentioned, track 4 is only a minute long. I don't know if I'm going to run it into or out of track 3 or use it to start to get into track 5. We'll see how things go. For now, though, let's check out Absolute Virtue. An interesting, very metal sound here, and then that's a very punky thing to do while still sitting within the metal atmosphere. I knew it. The 16th note guitars had to have brought in blast beats. Such a black metal thing to do. See? Just a hair bit behind the beat on these guitar lines. This is all on the beat though. It's not a pattern. The shifting accent patterns on the bass and drums. I like this idea on paper. The heavy weight, the spacious drumming, those whale sounds. It's a very cool idea. Yeah, dude, I like that. Like, that's a cool idea. You have this nice floating sound. It's kind of, it has a neutral emotion to it, which I think is interesting, given how angry and intense most of this song is. That melodies, pretty much the only melodic element in here. There's a lot of harmonic and textural components to this song. It feels like it wants to be optimistic. We have this boo, this big leap up in pitch. Feels like we're rising into something, but when you take the notes themselves and pair it against the chord, it doesn't really give any emotional information. It's a neutral range. It isn't victorious, it isn't triumphant, it isn't hopeful, it isn't positive, but it's also not sad, angry, or anything. It just is. It sounds cool, but it doesn't convey much emotionally. I think that's a really cool idea right there. Almost writing apathy into the music. assuming that's the direction they want to go into. Otherwise, it could just be a cool riff. Maybe there's not much more thought put into it than that. That's always a possibility with any music. But the thing that really throws me off here is the execution of it all. I haven't really talked too much about the production. I think the production's fine, generally speaking. There is a nice separation between tones. As bassy as the guitars are, it doesn't overpower the actual bass guitar down there. I can hear what it's doing with rather a good amount of clarity. It could be clearer, but it's fine enough. It's not super muddy. There's a lot of noisy things going on. Everything's compressed and distorted. It could very much have been a work of art that was in a totally different sonic direction and just was not very listenable on sort of a clarity level of things. So I like that they went that direction, but there's still a strange power that the drums have where they just always seem too loud. Other than that, though, I think everything's generally fine. I would like a little bass boost, but honestly, I can hear it. That's usually good enough for me. My bass hearing is so terrible that if I can hear it, you're probably doing a decent job at promoting it. Spatially, not even just volume-wise, just like carving out room for it to exist. But the thing that continuously threw me off there is the lack of timing. Again, I'm not going to go over this entire topic, but it was really on display there. And every single time that we came back, we repeated this idea, the notes that were slightly behind were different. And there's actually one run through where the guitar hit everything right on the beat. It's just, it pulls me out. I know some people like the raw side of music, whether it is punk or metal or whatever. They like things to be raw. They don't mind temporal dissonance or disconnect, whatever you want to call it. I'm not one of those people. Put things where they need to be. And I don't know, dude, it keeps pulling me out of it. If this is going to be a constant thing, I might get to a point where I'm a bit aggravated with the band. Like, dude, just practice your music. But no, like that's a bit on the jokier side. Would I like things lined up more? Sure. Do I appreciate that there is artistic value in the looser temporal components? Yes. I'm not saying that if you enjoy this, or I'm not saying that glassing is doing it wrong. None of that. If you enjoy this, that's fine too. It's just not my cup of tea. If I were performing this, I would want everything to be perfect. When I'm listening to it, I want everything to be perfect and perfectly in time. Of course, that seems to differ from authorial intent. The band wants something else. So what I want wouldn't be perfect for them. It's a subjective perfection. But it is one that, well, this is the second time it's pulled me out of the music, out of the atmosphere, out of the feeling and emotion that's being conveyed, because I'm thinking, dude, probably could have just rehearsed another day and been fine. I'm not thinking about the music anymore. I'm not engrossed in the sound. I'm thinking about the performance. And the only time you really want the audience to do that is when you're killing it. When you are just being an absolute virtuoso on your instrument, that's when you want people to think, dude, this guy's phenomenal. I could watch him play. I don't care what he's playing. I could watch him play for hours straight. You don't want people thinking about your performance when it's on the less technical side. When it's a bit, in this case, I'm going to say it, sloppy. The timing is sloppy. Maybe it's what they're going for. Again, that's fine. It's just not, it's not working for me personally. I'm going to try not to bring that up anymore, but I guarantee it's going to show up across this album, because here we are, 3 tracks in. I've already talked about it for 2 of them. It's going to be in here. 3? No, I've talked about it for 3. I didn't bring it up on the first track, but I did notice it, and I mentioned that I noticed it when I brought it up after track 2. So yeah, dude, that ending would have been phenomenal for me. A peak of the album so far, and instead I'm just frustrated with it. That's not fantastic. Now, this song, though, looking at more of an emotional side of things here, to me, this song is about discontent. It's about frustration. And I think kicking it off with some black metal absolutely leans into that. And I could hear it coming too. The 16th note picking on the guitars, both of them going off, harmonizing with each other with a small harmony. They're probably only a third away from each other. The drums cutting out, just the guitars. And I heard it in my head. I was like, blast beats are coming in after this. And then I thought, no, dude, this is post-metal. They're going to find something to do with this. No. No, not at all. They went for the blast beats, and it was fine. Like I said, like I have said, I enjoy that as a flavor. And I thought right there it worked really well, especially coming off of the brightness and positivity and comfort of Burden. To go from that into this noise at the beginning of this first track is whiplash. And I'm sure that's exactly what they're going for. And starting off with a bit of a noisier, punkier idea, especially with that dun 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 snare pattern. As loud as that snare was, I mean, that dude must have been hitting it with all of his strength. And then to push that into the black metal part, yeah, dude, this is a way to say we took things down to a 4, we're going back up to 11. And it works. Phenomenal start to the song. But then through the rest of the track, I had a tough time recognizing repetition. There's just a flurry of new ideas coming out at me, and all of them are filled with noise and a lot of attacks, and it just never lets up. It is abrasive, it is driving, it's grinding even. It's kind of grinding me into the ground with its weight and noise and aggression. I do think this is maybe not necessarily the heaviest song on the album so far, but certainly the most abrasive. Barring the beginning of Burden, which was bonkers, but a condensed section. This was consistent across the entire track. And everything about it just feels like lashing out, or as the kids say these days, crashing out, which I always thought meant to go to sleep. That's how we used it back in the 2000s. I'm going to crash out means you're so exhausted you're going to pass out. No, apparently now it's like throwing a temper tantrum. So that's your modern slang with Bryan moment. It just feels like thrashing around though. I'm just throwing a temper tantrum, so much noise and chaos and sound and screaming. Maybe it's well-deserved. These people seem pretty upset about stuff, and they feel like they can't do anything about it. That's what I got from the first couple of tracks lyrically. So to just lash out on this track, okay, I can see where that goes. That's a pretty good way to continue moving the album forward. But I want to take this back a second, moving away from emotion to composition, and more importantly, I think structure. One thing that I really enjoy about this band is that they don't really stick to ideas very long. In fact, a lot of sections, or a lot of specific ideas, only exist for one repetition. The first time and then the first repetition. So we get to hear them twice before there is some sort of variation or alteration or change to it. Now they did steer away from this. At the end of Burden, we began to hear longer repetitions and really being enveloped in this one specific sound. But the beginning of Burden, I talked about how we moved through a couple of ideas rather quickly. And then this track, and even track 1 to a lesser extent, while we are within maybe a verse and then a chorus, within the verse, it might be, I don't know, 16 bars long, give or take, but there's so many different variations on an idea within that. The drums have their own patterns that they're going to be moving around. Usually once you hear a drum fill, which is every 4 bars, you're going to get a brand new drum pattern after that. You don't get to stick with the same drum pattern for too long. Usually the accent pattern will be the same so that you can keep the general sense of groove, but what happens around that is going to shift. And the same thing's true about the guitars. as well. They may keep certain key notes or certain accented notes in order to, again, retain groove or specific harmonic movement. Maybe the chords, well, the chords are going to stay the same, whoever's playing chords, but the rhythmic ideas might shift up a little bit. The pitches, if it's not the chord-based guitar, they might change up a little bit. Maybe you're going to play the exact same thing we did, but now we're going to, instead of holding a note out, we're just going to stop it abruptly and have a moment of space. Or if we were using space, we're just going to hold a note out across that. Some sort of variation to change up the specifics of the idea without changing too much of the foundation of the idea. And I find this to work really well. It keeps the songs moving forward at a nice pace. Even Burdern, at 7 minutes long, didn't feel that long. And the other tracks, I felt like they've gone by in a blur. And they are on the shorter as far as runtime's concerned, but they still feel even shorter than that. This was 4 minutes long, and honestly, it felt like maybe it was 1.5 or 2 minutes for me, which is quite impressive given how abrasive the sound is in general for me. There's some stuff in here I like. The punkier ideas tend to work well for me, but I mean, it's all presented in a very metallic foundation, and that doesn't always click with me, but the music still passes by relatively quickly, which means I'm enjoying it on some level. And it might be just the feeling of rapidity while we are still stuck within a section, maybe like a verse for, a full minute. It still feels like there's like 4 or 5 micro ideas within there rather than it just being the riff or the verse for an elongated amount of time. So personally, I think that works really well. It's a good medium point between constantly changing ideas and doing the post-metal thing of just residing within a specific sound for an elongated amount of time. And it kind of matches both of those. We get to stay in the atmosphere, in the emotion for a longer period of time, but it also doesn't feel like we're completely standing still. There is a pace, a sort of momentum through it. Let me hit some lyrics on this one, and then we'll do the next 2 tracks. And once again, we have some lyrics that I wish had a little bit more depth to them. We have another repeated phrase here, this time our broken hell of shadows, which I think is a really interesting concept, assuming how I read it is intended. A broken hell would be one that doesn't work, so a place that's supposed to punish those who went against the grain aren't necessarily punished the way they should have, but it is full of shadows. Figures that represent who they are rather than who they actually are. And so to me, this is more about the concept that maybe it's like those who said they would guide us ended up being more shadow than anything else, the shape of a leader rather than leaders themselves, and we're surrounded by them, which is why this doesn't work. Something along those lines. The rest of it, though, much like the last track, is rather vague. The beginning simply talks about having your actions, the stories of your actions spread far and wide. It says, know us by name, forlorn black sky, spread our remains. But from here I get a bit lost. Starve away and stave the lost, all too often forgotten. Fall deaf and spare us the remonstrance of God. Our course is a constant scar. With the burdens of rot, scorched eyes, reclaim your wings of the flight. And again, I don't know. I'm very lost on that. So I don't really know how to tie this one into the concept of virtue and unrelenting, absolute virtue. I fear this is where the lyrical analyses are heading. Me just kind of, well, I don't know. 2 in a row, and 66% of the opening third of the album is not does not instill faith that I'm going to get any of the future lyrics. All right, let's hit the next group of tracks. Nice use of reverb here and delay. Kind of mimicking what we had at the end of Burden. Type of momentary positivity. Oh, it doesn't connect to either surrounding track. I mean, we do have that slight fade. That last note did linger into the beginning of this track for a second or two. But it's not like it's musically tied to this. That's a massive toe. Fluctuating time aside, I really like the syncopation around 1 and 3 and the accents on 2 and 4. I love that extended tom run at the end of the phrase. And the vocals are an interesting floatiness above all of this. Interesting, just as I got done talking about how their songs constantly change, even on the small nuanced level, we get this track, which is hyper focused. The first one we've really had all song, or all album. Up on the bell of that cymbal. Dude, that drum part is sick. Okay, so this was interesting. Faint, I still don't know what to make of. It's a beautiful little interlude. I like what it's doing. I don't understand its place in the album. It's like they wrote a nice little riff and they're like, well, we don't want to cut it. It's a cool riff, but we can't really expand it. And I've been there. I have dozens, probably more than like 50 projects where I have one or two cool riffs and just slamming your head against the wall trying to expand them out. Just kind of leave them to the side. Unfinished works. Maybe future self will be able to do something with it. I would never imagine to just release it in the middle of an album of other great ideas that expand into things. But I will say that having 80 seconds of calm is well appreciated. This is a heavy album. But it's interesting that the ending of Burden, I thought, also gave us rest in a song that made sense having it there. Faint just kind of appears and then is gone. Which is wild, too, because Twin Dream is an anti-Burden. Burden was a song that started out as chaotic as Glassing has ever been on this album. Even to this point, we're coming up to the halfway point, and Burden is still one of the most chaotic sections. The beginning of it is one of the most chaotic sections we have on it, the album so far. And it finds ways to soften the sound over time. Twin Dream does the opposite. We start off with the softest the song is and build from there. In fact, having Faint as the intro track to Twin Dream and maybe even the intro section to Twin Dream would have made a lot of sense to me. We start small, we start pretty, and we build into disgusting and heavy and layered and dense and loud. But that's not how it worked. Faint just ends. And then Twin Dream starts with drone. A noisy feedback coming in at the beginning of the song that also feels very disconnected from the rest of it, but is a transition of sorts. And then we get the really meaty bass guitar at the beginning of the track. And from there, we build everything up. It would be very cool to have Burden, and then Absolute Virtue as a sort of palate cleanser, and then Faint / Twin Dream being the anti-Burden. That would have been a very cool thing going on in here, and it's not what we got. Also, I want to apologize right here. It's becoming clear to me we're about halfway through the album. Probably time-wise, we're over halfway since the long tracks are front-loaded on this album. I feel like I'm being more critical than I have been on other albums. This one's just, it's not working for me. I'm trying to get on some like cool objective things, but there's so many subjective nitpicks I have for this. And I haven't found a song that's really clicked with me yet. And that's just exacerbating my feeling of, well, disconnect with this album. It's just, I'm not feeling it. I don't even know if I'd feel it on another day. I don't think this album's for me. So I am looking at the notes I took though, and they're mostly positive. So let's get back to that. This song has some wild production on it. Absolutely bonkers. I mean, we start off with a humongous bass tone. Sounds great, honestly. We do some cool things with it. We build from it. I had mentioned that this album's kind of predicated on this idea of constant, nuanced momentum. We kind of get that here. We start off with this bass tone. We bring some drums in. We bring some guitars in. We bring the vocals in. And all of them are adding more nuance. As more layers come in, some of the first layers are changing up what they're doing. We do reach a point, though, where they stop doing that. And then we sort of just have a sound for like 3.5 minutes straight. I did find that to be ironic, given that I just talked about how this album loves to keep a constant pace, and then we get a fairly straightforward track, at least, you know, through most of it. We'll get to the end in a second. But I like the beginning. There's cool groove to it. The drums are doing some interesting stuff. There's a nice syncopation going on. I had mentioned we have these solid 2 and 4 backbeat accents, but that the stuff going around beats 1 and 3 are very syncopated. Cool things going on there. We pretty much have no downbeats on 1 and 3. It always comes in slightly after, either halfway going to beat 2 or even at sometimes 3/4 going into beat 2, just a hair before beat 2 actually happens. So there's some really cool syncopation going on there. It's a groovy start. We have the vocals, and they're sort of elevated above everything else. The clean vocals with the reverb I thought worked really well against this heavy, rooted, massive bass and guitar tones. And it just, the heavy emphasis on the drums, it is cool. Rule of cool writing here. Absolutely loved this moment. The timing stuff still got to me, but very cool. Now, I had mentioned that the song kind of stagnates for a while, and it does. There's some smaller nuanced ideas, but it's not quite what the other tracks do. We sort of just sit within this vibe for a while, which I think is important because of what the song decides to do at the end. I had mentioned it's like an opposite Burden. The anti-Burden, if you will. Rather than de-escalating the track, we are going to escalate it. And the way that we move through the final 2 minutes of this song is a spectacular whirlwind of noise, of aggression, of sound. I don't know any other way to put it. What I do find interesting is that the drummer does bring back some variations on some of their accent patterns from earlier in the track. And I think the chord progression after one segment, which moves into a wildly different area, is a callback from the beginning as well. So they are trying to loop things back while also ramping up the intensity. The intensity is ramped up by volume, by attacks. We are getting so many snare hits. And like I said, this dude beats the snare. I don't think I've heard a single ghost note on this track at all. The dude has some sort of vendetta against his snare drum, and he refuses to hit it at anything other than the most amount of power he can use in whatever hand he's using to hit the snare. It is kind of impressive how there's very little accentuation variation going on with the drums, particularly with the snare. Cymbals? Yeah, dude, we've had light cymbals, had loud cymbals, we've been up on the bell, little dexterous cymbal work. The toms, we've had quiet toms, we've had heavier toms. The snare, though, one level, loudest crack you can get out of it. There's no ghost notes in this album. uh, But yeah, lots of snare hits, lots of guitar accents, lots of screaming, and it's just this big, heavy moment, but we've also ramped up the tempo. This section's faster than the previous 4 minutes. We do this for 40 seconds or so, and then we bring in a new idea. It's even faster, it's even denser, the instruments are even louder and larger. The dude's hitting the snare more often. And now we have growls in here too, and then there's another section. We ramp everything up again, and this one's just crazy. I can't make sense of anything going on in here. The production is doing its best to have some level of separation to make this listenable, but the composition itself is trying its hardest to be a cluttered mess, and it's doing a really good job at that. This is a wildly frantic ending that I think does a great job of, like I mentioned, being the anti-Burden, of taking this song that isn't necessarily feel good, not like Burden's ending, but certainly a bit calmer, and ramping it up into this feeling of being in a vice and just having it tighten over time. The walls are just caving in this entire song. The anxiety is ever increasing, and there is no escape from it. What's interesting is they call it Twin Dream, but I kind of view it as one escalating concept. I don't see any elements of parallelism in here or duality. I don't see any double elements in the music at all. And this, I mean, other than some of the elements of emotional despair that we saw in the first couple of tracks, most of this is just kind of noisy, abrasive music. It's going to work really well if you're focusing on negative aspects in your lyrics. But other than that, I haven't really seen a lot of synergy going on with the lyricism and the music. So maybe there's nothing supposed to be twinning in here at all. Maybe Twin Dream only relates to the lyrics, or maybe my concept of a twin dream and looking for ideas of two or duality or parallelism in the music is a dumb thing to begin with. Maybe I should have just enjoyed the music. Yeah, I think that about wraps it up then. One idea growing over a track, big sounds, inverse of constant. Yeah, okay, so we touched on everything I wanted to bring up here. All right, lyrically, we have a song about getting out of a void, and I don't know, there's a little bit of survivor's guilt, possibly, but it's also a bunch of individual escapes rather than a group effort. The beginning says, "You made it out, why couldn't I?" A couple of stanzas later says, "I made it out, why couldn't you?" It talks about how easily it is to get caught up in this darkness, this pit. It says, "A second glance is all it takes. We should have moved a little faster." The concept of just getting distracted. Just a little thing, a second take, second look, little distraction. Now you've slowed down too much, the pit catches up. It says, "Hope is an unending sore. God's reach cannot find you, all in the void we shall rot." Now this is vague enough to be able to represent just about anything. It could be the void of depression. It could be poverty. It could be life in general. It could be oppression. I mean, there's a lot of ways for us to feel like we're stuck in a void. But the song seems to focus entirely on singularity and not group work. You made it out, I made it out, but never we made it out. The only collective we have in here is we shall rot. I don't have much else to add to that, but I don't see a duality in here either. A twin dream. I'm curious what that's supposed to represent. Faint, of course, had no lyrics, so we'll push forward into the final lengthier track on here called Godless Night. Just over 6 minutes. Everything else hovers around the 2-minute mark. Let's dive in. And much like Twin Dream, we have another slow start on this one. The heavy compression and reverb is a very warm sound. Presents a white noise that almost reminds me of the ocean. Not the band, but like waves at the ocean. There's just a nice subtle hiss alongside the pitched drone. As heavy as a sound as this is to kick off with, it's interesting that there is a tinge of positivity to it, possibly even hope, despite the negative relationship to hope dictated by the lyrics of the last track. And maybe that's what it's supposed to be. Hope is an unending sword. It's about an inability to heal. And no matter how much positivity comes out of some harmonic elements here, there is still the sharp, abrasive tones, the heavy weight of everything. Still the pain of the open wound. Very warm movement there. Also, this is quiet. Watching the volume meter over there, we very rarely hit full volume, and it's usually just the bass kick. the droning with the rhythmic pattern here just sort of feels like, once again, despair of just one foot in front of the other, no point in trying, just get through the day. It's about pushing forward without change, without emotion. It's kind of carrying some of that apathetic vibe that I picked up on, was that track 3? Not really warmth or comfort, but a little bit of tenderness in here that I really like. The drums are getting louder though, and that guitar is a very sharp tone. I think this song just is. I thought vocals were coming in for a second. It does a great job of feeling hollow and empty, wanting more, but knowing the pain of hope. Deciding to push away from those instincts. Moments like this really want to break through, but ultimately don't. The emotions get compressed and bottled down again. Yeah, I think I've said what I need to say for that one, so we'll just push forward to the next track. What a change. There's actually a point I expected it to go into the next track because we started that new pattern, that new rhythm with like 10 seconds to go, and it's driving. That's not a tapering down rhythm. That's a building intensity, and then it just stops. And I don't know much about that. It's an interesting way to wrap that up. This is just a noisy track. Honestly, 2 minutes of raw tension. There is a neat little pattern in here, rhythmic pattern. For some reason, it reminds me of nu metal. The dun 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 dun. You kind of like bend into this higher pitch. In fact, you know what? It reminds me of Korn. That's what it, not just like generic nu metal, but like early Korn sounds. So that was kind of an interesting thing there. I mean, they've already been playing around with textures and bends and grittiness and honestly shifting rhythmic cadences, because that thing is the dun 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 dun. I mean, that pushes forward and then wow, and it's kind of like this moment where time suspends for a moment. You don't have that rushed cadence. You just kind of have this floating lack of gravity momentarily. And we actually see quite a bit of that push and pull here. Also, the idea of constant change going on. After a while, that shifted to bump, 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 shifting from eighth notes to quarter notes. So that's one of those ways that they'll change things up without changing things up. It helps the song feel like it's progressing without actually constantly moving to new ideas. But we have that bend, we have the riff, the drums are loud, and the vocals are screamy, and there's compression, white noise in the background of all of this. I don't know what instrument's doing that. Maybe it's just a secondary sonic element of one of these instruments. Just it's so loud, aside from what it's playing, it's also creating all this feedback. But by the end of the track, we've really pushed into noisy dyads, really unstable 2-note chords, which is a dyad, and then the noisy part is the unstable part. And I don't know, dude, it lost me. I think it's good for what it's doing. It's hilarious to come off of Godless Night and just immediately into screaming and heaviness. High contrast, for sure. And this isn't the first time they've done that. And I'm pretty sure it's cracked me up the other couple of times it's happened too, because it is such a sharp change of pace. This album is all about 180 turns. It's not even sharp 90-degree turns. We are just doing the exact opposite of what we were doing, a complete heel spin, in order to go in the polar opposite direction of what we were doing. And it happens so frequently from track to track too, but there's a couple of songs that do it within the track. So I like contrast. I like dynamics. It's got to be a little more cohesive though. But I appreciate what they're going for here. I mean, here's the thing. I've been harsh on this. It's no secret this album is not clicking with me. But I will say what this album does well is be incredibly expressive. This feels like someone who has a lot of pent-up negative emotions and doesn't know what to do with them. They don't feel like there's any point in expressing them. There's already been multiple lyrics about despair and feeling of being caught in voids and just nothing is worth doing. And so it's very much, just going through the motions of life at this point. One foot in front of the other, just get through it. And I think that apathetic element and almost, I'd say, a cold indifference to emotion shows up across this album in multiple places. There are certainly heavy, pulverizing sections that feel like the weight of the world is crushing down on you, but there's just as many where it feels like it's creating a worldview where emotion is a weakness. We've already seen them say that hope is the pain of an open sore. Why would you hope at all? Why would you want change? Well, you would want change, but not getting it is just incredibly damaging emotionally and mentally. The best way to save yourself is to cut yourself off from the world. And I think bottling everything up like that certainly creates this. I think this is the second time I'm going to use the word temper tantrum, and I know that's usually used as a derogatory for someone who just isn't getting their way and is throwing a hissy fit about stuff. And again, hissy fit is another phrase usually used negatively to describe someone's actions of just having an outburst. But that's what this feels like. It's an emotional outburst after you've tried to bottle and contain emotions for so long, masking for apathy and having it just erupt in whatever fashion it may be. People are not designed to live like this. It will explode out. You will be a volcano of negativity. It will be vulgar. It will be harsh. It will be gritty. It will be disgusting. That's what a lot of this feels like. There are moments of clarity, of beauty. We've had two so far. Godless Night, you might be able to argue, has a little bit of it in there. But honestly, Burden and Faint are the only two places I've heard anything that really leans into more of a beautiful sonic palette. But I think the lyrics tie into a lot of what's going on here, and it's just emotional frustration, wanting something better, even just a modicum of something slightly better than what we have, and never getting it, and learning that the best way to protect yourself is to just not hope for anything. And we are seeing the repercussions of this bottling up of stuff. At least that's what it seems like to me based off the lyrics that we've read so far. And the music that we've heard. And from that angle, like I've said a couple of times here, this stuff is artistically and thematically really well done. Now, granted, we've gone through this route a couple of times. These sorts of extreme negativity or extreme displays of negative emotions are very rarely my cup of tea. I don't mind heavy or aggressive music, but it has to be tasteful, a tasteful heaviness. Is that fine? I don't want to say anything that would imply something is better than another as far as emotional display in emotion. I mean, in art. But I can take it in doses when it's paired with the opposite. Beautiful heaviness, I'm down for that. Grittiness that's paired with poppier segments, I can get on board with that. Really great. But when we have something like this that really focuses on heavy negative emotions, it just doesn't click with me sonically because it is a lot of gnarlier tones. But also emotionally, lyrically, I have a hard time connecting with this stuff too. So yeah, I think the more we get through this album, the more I understand why it isn't for me. Like at the beginning, I'm like, yeah, dude, this bounces off of me, not my cup of tea. But now I'm like, I get it. I know why this wasn't working for me to begin with. I'm having a much better understanding of what it's doing, and that, in turn, as usual, gives me a much stronger appreciation of what this album is doing. And so, as usual, casually, this probably wouldn't have made it past the third track, maybe. The end of Burden might have intrigued me. I'd be like, oh, maybe a little bit further. But I'm glad I'm getting through it in this setting, in this context, in a sense of being forced to finish it. Because I am finding that the more I listen to it, the more I appreciate it. And the more that I'm glad it exists. I said my piece on Godless Night already. Had quite a few things to say during the reaction itself, and it was a rather static track, which I think is interesting, seeing as most of these songs have been fairly dynamic, except for 5 and 6. The two 6-minute songs in the middle of the album, they really took their time. But given what we heard with Doppler and the short lengths of these final couple of tracks, I'm assuming we're going to ramp things back up. Well, they might surprise me, but that's what I'm assuming anyways. Another one I'm a bit lost on. The Last of You, Something So Awfully Wrong, A Vanished Voice, like a jewel in a bed of fog. That phrase, a vanished voice like a jewel in a bed of fog, is repeated 2 other times. It's an important phrase, but I don't know. I mean, it makes sense. I get it. You say something and it fails to hit anyone's ears. Just like a jewel in fog is going to be difficult to see. But it says that there's an unearthed resonance, just single words, an echo in and an echo out. An endless symphony, melodies reign to preserve the noise. Chords of the spirit shine to the infinitely blind. The only thing I can get from any of this is that there's talking going on but no listening. Doesn't really say why there's no listening. I think that's a really important thing, but it could just be that the song is an expression of frustration that their words continue to fall on deaf ears. That's the best I get out of it. And maybe if I understood some of the other tracks, I could put some context to this, but the only thing I really get out of it is a continued frustration with the way things are. And it does line up with those themes that are prevalent through the album. But I would imagine by this point, I mean, we're heading into the final third of the album, I would have a stronger grasp on what these songs are trying to say. And maybe I do. I just did go over how all of this album feels like the eruption of ignored emotions. That trying to live a life apathetically has led them to this point of lashing out. But if that's true, then we already knew that they felt alone. We've heard that through a couple of tracks. Unheard kind of falls in line with that. I don't necessarily dislike these lyrics. I'm just trying to find a larger scope to them. Maybe there isn't one though. The next track is called Among the Stars, and we'll probably run that into Where Everything Is Still. Very drastic shift, a drop in tempo and movement away from 6/8 to a 4/4 meter. That's a cool pattern right there. 4 bars of one thing, 4 bars of a slight variation, and then the next 4 bars are new entirely. Very dense atmosphere here. Oh, that's something I hadn't thought about. The first time, the variation, and then the new idea, only a 12-bar praise rather than 16. Yeah, I don't have much to add to that one. Cool riffs. I like the rhythmic pattern too, that ending idea. We do hear a little bit more post-hardcore in that one, which is nice. It's got some punkier ideas, but it is pretty much what I've come to expect from this album. Now this, a ballad. I like how little it is. The melody barely has the strength of character to shine and cut through. It's timid off in the corner. That's fantastic. And this is very emotionally resonant in a way we haven't really seen on the album. Whereas Hope sometimes shines through momentarily, this is a rather optimistic song, still marred by pain, but with a brighter outlook on things than previous. Is that a trumpet in the background? I don't think so. There's a lot of effects on it though, and it does have a brassy quality to it. Yeah, very inviting, very comforting, but not perfect. There's still pain, there's still compression. Oh, interesting place to stop harmonically. Metal, punk. Metal, punk. That's fun. So we have 10-beat phrases, but it's definitely 4/4 with a 2-beat extension that just feels weird. Counting it in groups of 5 does not fit the rhythm at all. All right, a quick recap here. Track 8 did a lot of what I expected the album to do. It's heavy, it's noisy, it's abrasive, it moves, there's varying ideas, but kind of lock into specific larger concepts. Track 9 was a gorgeous ballad of hope. I really hoped it would have been a turning point for this album, especially with the next track called True North, having a directionality. The whole point of True North, the Northern Star, is knowing where you are when you're lost. It is a glimmer of hope. It is direction. At long last, here at the end of the album, the track is called At Long Last. It's the next one. We haven't heard it yet, but these words, True North, at long last, for an album that is so focused on feeling lost and not knowing what to do next, and this apathetic view of disarray and being disheartened about things and full of despair, all the dis words, honestly. To finally, at the end, find your direction, find your calling, to begin moving towards it. Finally, at long last, we can move out of this. That's what I expected based off the titles here. And track 9 gives us musical resolve. All of the aggression throughout the album is distilled here, wrapped up in track 8 to be dismissed for track 9, where we can find a peace. It is not perfection, but it is a peace in the chaos. And it makes sense to me that from this point, we would begin exploring some different ideas, maybe some positive concepts, still marred in negativity, I believe. This isn't about the healing process. This is about the beginning. It is finding the point where you choose to find healing. There's still going to be a lot of disarray from this point on. But I just expected something more from track 10, and I didn't get it. In fact, track 10 doesn't know what it is. It's fun. I'll give it that. The whole let's do a metal riff and then a punk riff and then a metal riff and then a punk riff, that actually shows up quite a lot in this track, and it never really knows what side it wants to be on. Does it want to be this heavy, doomy, sludgy, post-metal stuff, or does it want to be bouncy and syncopated? They're two very different keys, musical keys for these two different sounds. The note choices shift, the rhythmic choices shift. All of it changes. The way that you approach a riff in both of these styles is different. They're not fundamentally opposed, but they're very opposing ideas here. There is some carryover. If you make a Venn diagram, there is some stuff in the middle, but they're two very different types of music. And yet we have this back and forth, whether it is the rapid fire back and forth like at the intro, or where we do one elongated metal section, then we bring in some punky beats after that, and focus on noise over, overbearing texture. That's kind of fun to me, just the quick back and forth, but it doesn't actually build into anything. It's a novelty of just how different all of this sounds. And this novelty factor, I think, ties into the rhythmic components too. Let me reword that. Assuming that this song isn't about finding purpose in life, which is what I'm gleaning from the term True North, then this wouldn't be the first song where my understanding of what it was trying to do based off of a title clashes with everything else. I have been so far off on this entire album with where I expect things to go based on how they are setting them up musically, what kind of words and vocabulary they're using in the lyrics. I'm basically 0 for 100 at this point. And it really dawned on me right here. I made a note. Are we speaking different languages? because Glassing and we're having a conversation here. There's some back and forth. There's some of Glassing just getting the floor. There's some of me getting the floor, but I'm trying to get it. It has a stance. I want to know what it is. And the deeper we've got into this, the more often I will interpret something one way and then find out they never meant it that way at all. And in this song, I think it really dawns on me that I just don't get them. I don't at all. When they set something up and I expect them to do something, they don't do that. They take the music in a different direction. Halfway through this album, I'm like, you know what? I'm starting to get a gist for who you are. I'm starting to understand the way you speak, the way your mind works. I start changing the way I anticipate their music to grow, to fit the patterns they have taught me in the first half. And they choose to abandon them, and it's almost like they decided to switch dialects in the middle of our conversation here. And once again, I'm unable to really ascertain what they're saying. I don't find it really fair, to me at least, but it is authentic to them. But where I want to take all of this is that this song of True North, of finding your way, of what that's how I'm understanding it, this song has nothing in line with that at all. This song to me is full of incredibly awkward ideas. There are a couple of really solid concepts, I think, if they had decided to adhere to a stricter temporal model and really stuck with the grooviness and weightiness of what they're playing, but they never did. They always chose to change things up ever so slightly. Some of it very intentional. There were some parts where both guitars and the bass and the drum all accentuate just behind the beat. It feels like the entire song is momentarily slowing down for just this fraction of a second before the next beat comes in and they're right on it. But this beat that they're all on, just, a little bit behind, it's different every other bar. But it's intentional. They're all doing it perfectly in time with each other. But it completely removes the pacing of the song by having this subtle temporal nudge every once in a while. But it's not for speed either. I feel like if you rush something just a little bit, 2 or 3 BPMs, that's more visible than if you drag 2 or 3 BPMs. I don't know what it is. There's got to be a psychological element to that, but slowing down is so much more noticeable than speeding up, and we get a lot of that in this song. There's also just as many sections where a specific instrument will come in late, and usually, again, it's the drummer, and it just blows my mind. It has to be intentional at this point. No one hires a drummer who doesn't have a good internal tempo, doesn't have a good internal metronome, internal clock. I mean, this is the cornerstone of being a percussion player, is that you don't have to worry about melody. You don't really have to worry about texture and tone either. You got your drum kit, you hit it in time. That's your thing. Time is your thing. Any percussion player, you just don't hire. I mean, I don't know about hiring either. These could be a bunch of kids who are, they were friends when they started their band and they're just still friends to this day. I know this isn't their first album, so, but the thing is if your drummer can't keep in time and you want your band to stay in time, you find a new drummer. Obviously, they don't want to stay in time, which to me makes it more frustrating. Because there is some really solid ideas in this track particularly, but across the album that to me end up feeling less than, once again, pulling me out of the experience. And I said I wasn't going to come back and hammer this topic again, but really, once again, this is a song that I would honestly put at the top of my list for this album. And it isn't. There's too many moments where I forget that I'm listening to music and I get pulled out. Well, I forget that I'm in the music, and I get pulled out and remember that I'm just sitting here listening to it. I'm no longer engaging with it emotionally. I'm just listening to sound. And that's always frustrating to get pulled out of the experience. I suppose the analogy here is, when you're watching a film or reading a book and you're really into it, and then something just breaks your belief in all of it, something that goes against the rules that were written in the world of the story, and you're like, but that doesn't work. That doesn't make sense. And now you're pulled out of the experience. You're no longer in it. You're outside of it. And that's what happens to me so often on this album. It's very frustrating. And I think the end of this song is a really good showcasing of that. The riff is solid. The drum parts are solid. The screaming on top of all this is great. And then the temporal stuff comes in and I'm just like, what are you doing? You had gold and you're intentionally destroying it. And the thing is, like most other tracks, it's like one moment where I'm like, dude, I wish you had tightened the timing up a little bit. But this is just a song of really awkward rhythmic ideas. They're all over the place. The end is just the cherry on top. It is the most egregious example of it. But there's 2 or 3 places in here and entire transition fills that just rhythmically are awkward. They're weird cadences. The accent pattern's kind of strange. And this isn't even going with like slowing down or speeding up temporally. Like this is perfectly in time. It's just, what are you doing? It's like emphasizing the wrong syllables in speech. You're getting your point across, but it sounds weird. And that's what happens in this song quite frequently, is that the accent patterns are just awkward. No one accents like that. That's not where you place your emphasis. It feels like we were running at a brisk pace and now we're stumbling. We've tripped over a rock. We're trying to catch our balance. We haven't fallen yet, but we're doing that stumbling thing, right? Except it's a whole song of that almost. It's really weird, man. I don't get this track. And it really makes me think that we're just 2 different languages here. What they're wanting to say, it's just not coming through to me. There's a translational barrier, and I'm not getting it. I'm really not. But I am ready to dive into the final song here. So let's look at these 3 tracks worth of lyrics, and then we'll wrap this album up. Track 8, Among the Stars. I think this is the least amount of lyrics in any track. We have 2 6-line choruses. They're repeated. Our first verse is 3 lines. Our second verse is 1 line. 10 unique lines in total, which concise. You can do a lot with this, but also in character of pretty much everything I've run into on this album, I just wish that there was more. We tend to get a vignette, a series of vignettes of ideas that if you know the thread, you can tie it all together, but the transition concepts are removed entirely. And as someone who is not really great at poetic dissection, I'm certainly getting better, but it still needs to be delivered in a more straightforward manner for me. This goes right over my head. It says, remorseless harm, a violent wind's bray, forms of loss, shapes of always. The chorus says, ill eyes starve the fire on choked salvation, all eyes towards the sky where everything is still. The second verse says, thrashing shackled vitality. Yeah, dude, I don't know. This isn't even one where I'm like, I kind of got like a gut feeling it might be about this, and this means nothing to me. Well, let me take that back. Starving a fire on choke salvation is cool. And actually, I think I've said that a couple of times. There are some really strong phrases in this album. The lyrics as a whole may not always click with me, but usually there is one phrase or maybe a 2-line idea that I think is really well written with depth to it. It makes me think that most of the lyrics have depth if I understood what was really going on with them, if I had someone help walk me through this stuff. But the idea of diminishing someone's passions by delivering them the concept of salvation, but that which is shackled. You don't need to fight back. You don't need to have passion. The fire inside people can be starved. You can make them dull and lifeless. All you have to do is give them something they want. And you don't even have to give it to them. It can just be the illusion of giving it. This is choked salvation, not full salvation. This is salvation that barely works. Doesn't have enough air. It's choking. It's alive, but not fully functioning. It's the illusion of salvation, and it can be enough to placate a people, to starve out a fire. Now, I don't know how to extrapolate that to everything else, but I really like that line, especially when we look at, oh, this is the only line that's changed from the choruses. The second chorus is identical, except it says starve the fire, capitulation, to give into. Yeah. I just wish I could expand it. I wish I could understand the rest of the lyrics through that lens, maybe have it be the gateway into a proper understanding of what's being said here. And then among the stars. Yeah, I'm a bit lost on that one. I forgot that track 9 was an instrumental, so we don't have 3 songs to dig into lyrics on this one. We only have 2. And True North doesn't seem to be about gaining perspective or directionality at all. It is, once again, being enthralled, to be trapped within something. At the very beginning, it says irrepressible, this hold, a biting gloom will enshroud. Starkest feeling appears and grasps what's left. Come forward, the young moonlight, as a web of thorns enraptures. So we have gloom that enshrouds, to be around something. We have an irrepressible hold, to be held tight. We have a web of thorns, both a constriction and a pain. And then it says that we are enraptured. There's a lot of elements of being trapped in just the first 2 stanzas. It says, as the dawn arises, you seem so far and have bled. The bygone wish, let them come and name us. The final stanza says, blood trickles down in the purest form, ravished again as we lay banished. So it seems that at some point through all of this, I'm not saying it's a concept album, but a lot of it has been about being upset about something. And recently we have allowed our emotions to come through, no longer despair, but action. Here, though, our action has only led us into not necessarily a trap, but we're more restricted than we've ever been, possibly as a form of punishment. True North. I will say, though, being wrapped up in things, pain of thorns, yeah, this lines up with the music a lot more than the concept of finding your way. I'm really curious then, why choose True North? I guess ironically, sarcastically, there certainly isn't anything in here that feels like the non-ironic version of True North. Let's see how they wrap this album up. I don't know how I guess we need to bring things down. True North is an escalation of layers, of noise, of texture, of aggression. That certainly is a peak to me. I'd wager we're going to find a way to wrap things up here in our final almost 5 minutes. A slightly promising start, but like I said, we've not been on the same page at all. I wager it's gonna get intense. If I make a prediction and it actually comes true only for this final song, this is a really gorgeous start though. I like the variability on the drums, using every part of the kit in here, aside from the cymbals. But it has a nice melodic flow to it, the gentleness of this guitar against the abrasiveness of this one, and bringing back the reverb cleans from track 5, was it? I like the multi-layered writing on this too. We have this guitar against the center guitar, against the vocals. And we have some slight melodic flourishes on this new guitar over here now. So there's actually a lot of movement to this on the melodic scale that we haven't really seen too much of. This is a very emo finale. Mixed with a little bit of like shoegaze almost. Still finding ways to introduce a little bit of syncopation, despite the fact that one of the drummer's arms is dedicated to the crash cymbal here. Well, you know, I'll take a 1% prediction accuracy. Uh, the 0% kind of felt nice. But I did get one call right. That True North is too much of a peak to do another intense song after. You got to bring it down. You got to wrap the album up. So in the final moments, we finally began to communicate. Makes me wonder if maybe I should give it another spin and maybe I get it a little bit more now, or I don't know, maybe a second listen would be just as frustrating. Regardless, this was gorgeous. More of a emo shoegazy thing than post-hardcore or post-metal. It's a beautiful atmosphere. We have a lot of, well, actually the reverbed vocals have always been kind of shoegazy the couple of times they've been used. But we have beautiful melody lines. I mentioned that right off the start, we have three melodies or three melodic ideas anyways, the center guitar, the left guitar, and the vocals. Eventually, after like 16 bars, we added in two more guitar parts, a noisier side on the left and a melodic side on the right, which is interesting because the inverse of how the first layers were in those sections. And it's just this escalating dreariness from that point on. It is gorgeous, but it's also melancholic. I'd say this is bittersweet, probably, simply because there is positivity in this, but not in like a joyful direction, but it just feels at rest. There's a comfort in this song that really isn't present elsewhere. And I think that's a really important thing here because we're wrapping the album up. At long last, we have found peace, rest, something along those lines, but it's not without the negative weight that's been pervasive through the album. There is still a dreariness to this. And I think that combination works really well, that this whole album has been pushing towards. No matter how much hope you have, no matter how many positive moments you get, they're always married to or followed up subsequently by something abrasive and heavy. We've had plenty of hollow moments throughout here, plenty of aggressive moments, and a lot of melancholic ones, depressive ones. It makes sense that even in this final moment, we'd still carry some negativity into whatever peacefulness there is present here. But there's still the ending of the track, too. A white noise swells up under everything, goes away a little bit, comes back stronger, and then song's done. It's a singular focus with a very specific moment of ending. It's not a fade out. It isn't a last held out note that just continues to resonate until it naturally decays. We don't even really get too strong of a harmonic finale either. The chord progression is very cyclical. It does have rising and falling tension, but it doesn't necessarily have a point of finality within it, and we don't adjust the chord progression at the final moments of the song either. The song just abruptly stops. No point of resolution harmonically, nothing in the melody that indicates we are wrapping things up, and there's no quietness on the dynamic side either as far as volume goes. It just ends. I think that's interesting because when we take this concept of rest and negativity, we don't even get anything resolute in the final moments of the song or in the album. There is no feeling of completion here. Not for, presumably, whatever the song is about or the album is about. I still don't know if it's a concept album, but there are a lot of thematic ties through these tracks. I don't know if we're looking at a single person going through all these things, or if it's a vignette of people experiencing similar things, similar emotions. But they don't really get any proper rest, any moment of pure peace or finality to their life. And we don't get any finality to the album. At a point, it's just over. And that is just the final bit of discontent with this album. So many places where I find it frustrating, and it doesn't even give me a proper ending either. It just leaves me here hanging with an abrupt ending. But I suppose that at least from, without even heading into the lyrics, that already feels appropriate for what the album has been so far. And so I can appreciate that, again, even without hitting the lyrics yet. Well, I suppose that's it for my thoughts on the music of this album. Let me dive into some lyrics here and see how they're deciding to wrap this all up. Content warning here. Suicide. Not where I thought we were going, but once again, another heavy topic handled in a way that's heavy and depressing. And it's just another reason why I think thematically this has kind of bounced off of me. It starts off, says, "Some say reveries adorn our graves. Hold fast while we fade at long last." Then he says, "Cut wrists. Nothing says love like this. Clutched cross, mortal voice, send me off." So he takes his own life while clutching a cross, which I think is interesting because I don't think the Christian religion takes too kindly to people who take their life. And he's ready to be sent off. The chorus that's stated between these two stanzas: "Stillness moves at the speed of doom." We talk about rule of cool riffage, right? Where it sounds sick, the riff is just cool. It makes you want to play it, right? You're like, I got to buy a guitar. I want to learn that riff. It just sounds great. I think this is rule of cool poetry. It's not a great 2 lines, but just the imagery of it. Stillness moves at the speed of doom. First of all, we have the opposing idea there of stillness, a lack of motion, moving at any speed. But then the speed that it's compared to is doom, which is not a speed, but more of a mood. It certainly conveys a feeling, but it still just sounds cool to say. I feel like it's one of those things that if you start to dig into it, it kind of falls apart a little bit. It doesn't become gibberish. It still has meaning to it, but it really pulls that meaning from the surface level element of it. Glassing. Not my favorite lyrics so far. I think I don't even know if I'd say it's an appropriate end to the album lyrically. I don't know, dude. I'm not a big fan of suicide's the answer kind of thing, which I don't think this is saying, but it is where we end. And there's nothing in here that admonishes it either. So neither condemning nor condoning, but certainly ending the conversation with it. The album is about pain, and the album ends with suicide. I'm not a big fan of how all of this works together. And of course, the one song that I'm like, dude, this is pretty good. I can get behind this song, is the one that I'm least excited about lyrically. It's just, you couldn't let me have one, could you, Glassing? Oh, jeez. I guess those are my thoughts then. 2 hours, 40 minutes. Not super short, but certainly one of my shorter ones. I've said my piece on this. I was going to have like a little wrap up here, but I feel like I've repeated myself enough today. These are my thoughts. What are yours? If you have a different opinion on this, a different take on any of this, individual songs, maybe the album as a whole, I'd love to hear it. I'm obviously not the target audience for this, and I think those are the best times to read comments from people who really love this. I'd love to get that other perspective that I just can't get. There's just no way for me to see from that other side. So, and especially too lyrically, if you enjoy this lyrically, if you get this lyrically, I'm down. I want to know what's going on here. I get the gist of a lot of stuff, but maybe I'm off on some of it, and there's quite a few songs that just so I'm down to be educated today. Let me know what's going on. Put all that. Any other thoughts you have, any way you want to correct me if I misspoke about something or add on to something that I brought up, put that stuff down into the comment section below. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. Takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. All right, that wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow, though, 5 p.m. No, tomorrow's Sunday. Tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we have a live stream. I wake up, get into the stream, we chit-chat, we listen to some good music. Conversation takes us so many different places. Sometimes we're talking about music. Sometimes you get me derailed on genre, as we almost did today, too. It's just a chill, laid back couple of hours to hang out, chat with people. Good community, great conversation, and excellent tunes. Honestly, if you can make it, I highly suggest you do. It is a blast. But if that's not your cup, or if you can't make it, Monday, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC. As usual, we'll kick off next week's theme. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.